the system that we live in, the system that we work in, the system that we play in is all just based in racism. It was built in racism. It's something that has to be undone, and you can't undo it without acknowledging that that's how it was created, and that racism is one of the building blocks of the society that we live in. And I think, like you guys said, treating race and equity as a priority kind of makes it seem like something on a checklist that can be marked as done, and it's not something that is ever finished.
Welcome to Place Matters, a podcast about the intersection of race, place, and poverty. We will explore the belief that the path towards ending inequity and promoting prosperity is through the work of holistic neighborhood development. The content for this podcast is based on over 45 years of experience, expertise, failure, and hope from our organization, Focused Community Strategies, better known as FCS. This is the Foundations series, where we will talk about the big ideas and core frameworks that make FCS, well, FCS. I am Sean Duncan, the Director of Training and Consulting for FCS and the host for Place Matters. In 2020, the Childhood Opportunity Index released the results of their research in the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the U.S., where they scored these places on the necessary assets for childhood well-being. On a scale from 1 to 100, the index ranks each city's neighborhoods by census tracts. The national median score for each neighborhood is 55. However, when you disaggregate the data by race, white and Asian neighborhoods scored at 73 and 72, with Hispanic and Black neighborhoods scoring at 33 and 24. And though it's dangerous to conflate race with poverty, there is a disproportionate intersection of historic disinvestment and high poverty rates in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And it's in that intersection that FCS lives. And living in that intersection means that our work actually is not primarily about alleviating poverty, but about the pursuit of racial equity. And that pursuit has to be the context for everything that we do. Joining me in this conversation about how FCS uses racial equity as a lens is Joy Jackson, FCS's Director of Development, one of our lead consultants, David Park, and one of our community development advisors, Candace Kelly. All right, so FCS recently produced an additional strategic plan. We wrapped up our previous one and we started another 5-year strategic plan. And in that, we have these 5 priorities that are really supposed to guide the organization for the next 5 years. But we did not, and we deliberately chose not to make racial equity one of those priorities. Instead, we said racial equity should be the lens by which we view those priorities and anything else that we're doing. So tell me why that's an important distinction for us to make.
Well, I interpret it as a value more so than a priority, and that it should be broadly applied to every part of our work. And when I think about priorities, they change, but I think values should remain consistent. And so the lens helps us to shed light on all the racial dynamics that inform every part of our work, social, economic, structural, and that's what we're addressing here. So it really brings a level of sensitivity to our work, no matter what pillar or what position or what role you're playing within the organization.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's a lens more than a priority, because when I think about priority, I see it as like a focus. But sometimes if it's, let's say it's out of focus, that means it's not a priority, or it's, oh, we finished that and we're on to the next thing.
Yep.
And maybe it's because I'm a photographer and I get into cameras, but without a lens, you can't see anything. But to me, if we said race and equity is our lens, that means we cannot separate it from how we see the neighborhood, how we see our work, is that race is embedded in the repair, and race is, it's on our hands. it sort of stains in good and bad ways. It stains what we do. And so I thought, oh man, I really appreciate that language and that distinction, because if it's a priority, it can come and go, like you said.
Right.
And sometimes maybe we won't see it. But if it's a lens, you cannot see without it.
Yeah. It's the way we look at it.
Right.
And the way where we should come from when we are doing this work. And I also think that it interrupts the unintended consequences
Oh, well, yeah.
that when we take into consideration lived experience, when we take into consideration our neighbors, and we have to ask ourselves, how is this lived experience related to this particular program? How is this particular lived experience related to this policy that we have for our organization? So we really have to continue to think about that no matter what we're doing. So it's something that should be embedded in the work that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you guys as usual. But I think it's important to just keep at the forefront of our minds that the system that we live in, the system that we work in, the system that we play in is all just based in racism. It was built in racism. It's something that has to be undone, and you can't undo it without acknowledging that that's how it was created, and that racism is one of the building blocks of the society that we live in. And I think, like you guys said, treating race and equity as a priority kind of makes it seem like something on a checklist that can be marked as done, and it's not something that is ever finished. It's something that we need to perpetually be doing and looking at every aspect of everything that we do in that way, because racism affects every aspect of everything in our society. So I think it's important to look at it as a lens and something that is just part of every part of the system than to look at it as something that can be.
Yeah. And you said something interesting, Candace. You said unsee. Did you say unsee? Or I thought unsee when you were talking. You said it's something that can't be undone. It's something we need to acknowledge. Yeah. And I thought of it's something we cannot unsee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so then that, to your point about it being this lens, we don't want to unsee.
Right.
So we do need that lens of seeing to be able to do this work.
I was in a city council meeting recently, not the city of Atlanta. They've actually had a non-discrimination ordinance in the city of Atlanta for over 20 years, but this city doesn't have one yet. And so they were dialoguing through whether or not to do this. And it was fascinating to see a top leader really kind of push back on the need for it. And his rationale is like, hey, this is a diverse city. We have diverse business owners. We have diverse staffs at the different restaurants or businesses. So he's looking for isolated occurrences, and what he's not seeing is a lens that everything is based in this, right? The how our relationships function, how businesses are funded, how things are So he's really looking for I'm looking for. Kind of like you said with the checklist, Candace, is check, we're a diverse city. Look at our schools, check, they're diverse.
Right.
We don't need this ordinance in our city. And so he's kind of pushing back. To me, that's a way of saying I prioritize diversity, but not really saying I prioritize equity, to make sure that we're dismantling anything that would create kind of those unfair dynamics. And so this idea of not just did we get a black family housed, that could be a racial equity priority. Look, a black family has a home, versus we're going to look at every detail that it takes to build a house, to sell a house, to fund a house, to mortgage a house, what block it's on, every aspect of that, we're going to be asking the questions of how is racial equity embedded into every step. And so in everything we're doing, how's this a lens through what we're seeing?
Absolutely.
So in the strategic plan, this idea of this racial equity lens, we put it in this 3-part framework of acknowledge, affirm, and act. So I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from the strategic plan around the acknowledge, affirm, act, and then just get some feedback from you guys on why the language, why the framing is so important. So a quote from the acknowledge section. Racial injustice and anti-blackness pervades our social fabric in historic South Atlanta and beyond. The disparities we see in our neighborhood are the effects of policies and choices designed to discriminate based on race. So give me some context, so specific ways that racial disparities have created the challenges that we're addressing day to day in historic South Atlanta.
Well, I would say not only South Atlanta, but across the country in a lot of marginalized communities, you had redlining. So redlining contributed to disinvestment and segregation. And as you just said, the systems were not designed for people to succeed. In fact, they were designed for the opposite. And so those racist policies and practices really dictated where you lived, what job you had, the education they received, any chance for upward mobility. And it's led to this growing wealth gap that we see today.
Yeah.
So that's how I would answer that.
Yeah.
We've been affected in this neighborhood, this black and brown neighborhood.
Yeah. And a word that you said that really jumped out at me, disinvestment. I think all around, obviously the country, but South Atlanta is a historically black neighborhood. And then in the era of redlining, and even though it's still, the maps are still pretty relevant.
Pretty consistent.
Yeah,
Right.
they're pretty consistent with.
Yeah.
But like these neighborhoods where successful black middle class families or just black families, black and brown families exist and cohabitate, those are places where the government and funding and just resources were sucked away, essentially. And you can see the decline that followed that. And it's just a hole that these neighborhoods are still trying to crawl out of today. So,
I
Yeah.
think, and just to zoom out a little bit from South Atlanta is to recognize that this type of history, this type of localized history is often hidden from us and not taught. It's not, to the point, it's not acknowledged. I think the root of a lot of trauma, if not all trauma, is this sensation of powerlessness.
Yeah.
And so when you've had communities that are powerless to have agency in their economic future, educational future, I think part of it is acknowledging this history, these policies, these ordinances that have kept neighborhoods down. I think it's really important to acknowledge. And I mean, I was raised here. I've lived in the South my whole life, and I don't even know what happened down the street or on the other side of the tracks. And I find that to be one of the greatest travesties. And being educated in the South, I don't even know my neighbors. I don't know what they've gone through. And I think in the matters of race and black and brown communities, we're often separated from each other's histories. And so immigrant and then black and brown communities, we all feel like we're fighting for something and fighting our own battles and not recognizing that they're very similar, or at least some of the struggles we can really relate to each other, but we often find tension within each other because we feel like we're fighting for the same scraps.
Right.
Yeah, the maps that Candace referenced, I mean, if you look at the redlining map of Atlanta in the 1930s, you can track those pretty closely to the neighborhoods where schools are most underperforming, least graduation rates, or the most economic mobility. That it all tracks in the neighborhoods that were redlined versus the ones that weren't, right? So we still have this like long legacy of the effects of those decisions and the cascading decisions that got made after that, from that. And what the real stab in the back in all of this is like, now when we look at black and brown communities and we see underperforming schools or we see high rates of certain diseases, like there's a blame and shame that gets put on top of that, right? Which kind of leads into some of the language in the next statement that comes in the affirm piece, is that we have an opportunity and responsibility to dismantle unjust systems and mitigate their effects in historic South Atlanta through our work. We affirm the intrinsic value of black life in neighborhoods, and that racial equity helps everyone to flourish. So what are the systems, some of those systems that we're trying to dismantle here?
We're trying to build equitable housing policies and practices. We are creating affordable housing. We are creating wealth and food access. We're working with partners in education and jobs. We're hiring here at Community Grounds and Carver Market. And all those are real social determinants of health. So I think that we are dismantling quite a bit. It's a holistic way of working. Because it's a complex, it's complex, and there are lots of systems that need to be dismantled.
Yeah. There's the whole system and all the mini systems
Yes.
that make it up that we're having to work
Right.
within.
Yeah.
One thing I appreciate about the work of FCS is that we do this in conjunction and in partnership with the Civic League. I find that to be, in other words, we're not necessarily the pilot. We're the co-pilot, and sometimes we're the passenger in terms of where the neighborhood wants to go. And in my understanding, that how the neighborhood interacts with FCS is we're often sort of at the same table, but we're not leading the discussion. We're often sort of handmaidens to what the neighborhood is trying to do to help with what the goals and priorities of the neighborhood are. We're not establishing those ourselves.
Right.
And there's this phrase in that affirm statement from the strategic plan that says we affirm the intrinsic value of Black life and Black neighborhoods. Why is that an important phrase?
I'll go. Because we have been told that we are property. We have been told in history that we were not fully human. We have not been counted sufficiently. And we have to know that value of life is not determined by the color of your skin, and that needs to be stressed to Black and brown people, children, and it needs to certainly be understood by those that have not suffered oppression. So I think it's just important to the core of who someone is to know that they are whole and human and have something in them that is of value to society, and that they can make contributions to community, to their family, and to this world, because Black and brown people, like others, are these real creative and wonderfully created in God's what's my word? Image.
Yeah.
Yes, we are all created in God's image, and we need to understand that and believe that.
Yeah. And one of the Black neighborhoods piece jumps out at me, and it makes me feel a little emotional, actually, because I think just in the last year of my life, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on this concept of culture and the fact that I recognized that I have always clung to other cultures. Like, I'm hungry for culture. Like, I want to know, especially other Black cultures, my Caribbean friends, my African friends. I'm like, tell me everything. Share all your food. What's the music? Like, what are we listening to? I just want to feel connected to
Right.
the roots that I can't find. Like, I don't have that identity, because for generations and hundreds of years at this point, like, my family is so far removed from our African roots and any of our roots. Like, it's my great grandparents are from Georgia. Like, it's just all here. And this is not what my bloodline is. Like, American soil, that's not who I am, but it's all that I know. So, like, Black neighborhoods, when I think of, like, these thriving Black communities, I just picture Black joy, and I picture families and, like, recreating and establishing a culture that we lost, and having something to cling to and something to teach future generations about, and just something that we've had to recreate. So, like, when these neighborhoods are destroyed or disinvested, it's like, it's just another attack on culture in my eyes. So I don't know. I feel like, Joy, you did an excellent job like articulating the value of Black life and then that sense of community. But then when I picture neighborhoods, I'm just thinking immediately about culture and culture that was lost and culture that has to be recreated and things that we don't know about ourselves. Like a lot of the culture that Black Americans have is based in what we learned during slavery and what we started doing during slavery. Even like our dishes and Southern meals that we make is like based off of food that was scraps for us, but like now it's a delicacy, it's a tradition.
It's delicious.
It's like,
what it
it's
is.
delicious.
Are we talking about chitterlings?
Yes. So name,
Soul food.
name a little something, something.
Right.
But it's interesting to see, like, even how like Black American families create oxtail and what that is for us versus like Caribbean people, but then to see that line and like the fact that this is something that we did in Africa, like this is something we ate there. So I don't know, just having that connection. There's so much value. There's so much value there. It's invaluable. It's
Right. And
So-
here and here in Atlanta, we have so much rich Blackness. We're very fortunate to have the Atlanta University Center. So that's the largest consortium of historically Black colleges in the country. And from those that went to that university system came from these Black neighborhoods. And that was the rise of the Black middle class, the fact that we had these universities here. So it is really important that we affirm those that come from these Black neighborhoods, and we try our best to try to preserve some of that history, and so that people are really familiar with the jewel that is here in Atlanta. And we've had rise, of course, of the civil rights movement. You know, we're the wellspring of that era. We've had Black leadership. You know, I was very fortunate to grow up in Atlanta, and all my teachers were Black. All my elected officials were Black. My doctor was Black. My dentist was Black. So there's value that needs to be felt in, you know, what we bring. So I'm really grateful that I'm able to pass that on to my children. And then to your point, we've done some history of my family, and we've traced our roots back to Gambia. So that is something I want to experience with my children. So hopefully next year we'll be going, going over
Nigeria
to
over
West
here.
to West Africa, so that we can even feel that richness. You know, there is richness being here.
it's like a homecoming.
There is richness being from Atlanta, but there is a deeper richness that we were cut off from learning and knowing that is, you know, within reach now. And so I'm glad to be able to do that.
I think that's the most egregious metaphor for America, is that it's a melting pot.
Oh God.
And it's like, I don't want to melt. I don't want to melt. I don't want to be absorbed and, you know, and assimilated to the point where I lose my flavor, my sense of identity. And the crazy thing about being Asian American as sort of a more recent immigrant is, and to call this place home, is to say, I still don't want to lose a sense of my identity. So whether it's my language or the food or whatever it is, I don't want to melt into this pot. Like I want my kids to be able to know their Korean names if possible. And then the other challenge of that is to say, how do I stay who I am and build a loving community? Like how do we build this thing that's broader than just me, but also includes me as I am and as I want to be?
Right.
I think that's a real challenge.
I had a professor in college who, she also was disgusted by the melting pot metaphor. But she was like, we should be a salad bowl. Everybody has their identity. We're all together, but everybody has their particular like set of skills and background that they're bringing to to the party. So I always just think of the.
So there's another problem with the salad bar metaphor. Is that
I knew you were gonna do that.
oftentimes
What happens?
well, the problem with the salad bowl metaphor is that you pour over this white
Dressing.
ranch
Oh, my
dressing
God.
all over there, wash it out.
So for our listeners, there's a debate on salad dressing with our
boy,
team.
you gonna let him in
How
on
much
this?
you should
You're
have.
just wrong.
I'm always wrong, but I feel like I'm right.
He thinks you shouldn't have salad dressing at all.
Okay, that's
And if
off
the
topic.
metaphor-
That's
Shouldn't at
off
all?
topic.
Yeah, anyways,
But all that
But
to
see, if you
say,
listen to David, you'll hear the metaphor is right.
But was it because it was the white dressing?
yeah, that's the white dressing. That's the problem.
Balsamic. Oh, balsamic.
It's still European though. That's what I'm saying. That's a problem. Is what I'm trying to say.
I'm now gonna have extra judgmental eyes when I see you putting salad
wow.
dressing
what about
on
a
yourself.
Yeah,
pasta
there's just-
salad? No,
yeah.
same thing. It's fine. Okay.
Just ruining it for everybody.
There's no
right?
metaphor. Is what I'm trying to say. Is don't
Every
use the
time,
metaphor.
every
Watch
time
out.
we think we can rise and
Yeah.
But,
Yeah,
but
the metaphors
I
right.
think that's true. But like when we try to build, I know especially at churches, when we talk about multi-ethnic churches, it becomes multiple groups of people who express church in a white way, right? I mean, the music that gets used from whatever
Yeah.
big producer of Christian music is out there at any given time, like, so it becomes diversity without a real sense of like equity or inclusion. And I think
Right.
those are pretty different things. And
they are.
and so when it comes to this piece of acting, like what does it mean for us to act in place? I'm really struck by Candace's reflection on the intrinsic value of the Black neighborhood, because not all actors who are seeking to quote improve lower income disinvested neighborhoods are coming at it from the same place. Right? For some, a Black neighborhood is a problem to be solved. Right?
Yes.
It's social issues to fix. It's antisocial behavior and all these other code words we use for racialized views of communities. But to do this work from this standpoint of like we have an intrinsic belief in the value of this neighborhood and the culture that's there, and the deep awareness that we are acknowledging and affirming this history, these legacies that have put us here, right? Whether it's our schools or our streets or whatever it is, like there's a reason why we're here. That wasn't just the choice of a few people, and I think there is I was a part of this group that the Frameworks Institute was pulling together, and some of the research they've done about some fundamental ideas that shape the way American culture thinks about poverty. There's really these two big frames, and one is individualism, right? So we do think it's about the person's choices, which we're not saying choice isn't involved, but poverty is just one person's bad choice wouldn't hold up with the data. And the other is anti-Blackness, right? That we fundamentally assume that built into the culture there's an anti-Blackness view. And so for us to say, when I'm working, even if and I don't think that's just like overtly racist people think in anti-Black ways. I think you can be
Right.
a deeply compassionate person whose heart is broken over the state of things in our cities or neighborhoods and still have a fundamental view of there's something missing or wrong with the Black neighborhood, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so when we come to act, and so this is another piece of our plan, it says we will focus our work on addressing the effects of racially motivated inequity to the fullest extent possible, and we will align our work with our neighbors' priorities to maximize the opportunity to determine futures and create flourishing. So why is it important in that act piece that we talk about aligning our work with our neighbors' priorities? Why is that so important?
I think we have to, in the act of empowering others, we have to trust people that are closest to the problems are often and always the most capable of knowing and trusting their solutions. I think if we, I think this works in the microcosm too. Like if I was going to try to fix your problem for you without involving you and without really being in relationship with you, that can be, I hate to use such, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it can be violent. It can feel like violence, even though I mean it as kindness. And it, at the very least, it's belittling to say, hey, I think I know what you need. Here you go. I just think it's insulting and dehumanizing. And that's actually how the dehumanization is the origin of the problem. It's the origin of the injustice. So you can't use that as part of the solution as well.
Yeah.
We have to humanize as part of the solution, never dehumanize.
That even, we know that doing harm can be dehumanizing, but even the way we do good
is also
can be
Yes.
dehumanizing.
Right. Because for people, they were not given choices.
Right.
And so now we're saying, you still have no choice?
Right.
You know, so having a voice is empowering. You know, that is the way that we want those that are affected by our work to have a voice in the solutions of this work.
Right.
And if we're not, we are a barrier.
Right.
And we're not thinking of the best interest of people.
Right. And certainly we're not giving them autonomy,
No.
agency.
Right.
Even if even if I say I don't agree with the way they are going about it, it's still not me. I shouldn't be able to choose what
Right.
they should do.
Right.
Right. I'll give you a small example. Like I used to tutor. Well, I should say I tried to tutor at an after-school program. And it was a group of Hispanic students, and I had grown up, obviously, as an Asian kid, like respect for elders and respect for education was like a super high value. And I was helping this one girl read, and she was really struggling, and she wanted to go outside and play soccer, whatever it was. And I was like, we really need to read. Like my priority was like, you can't read the sentence, you can't even read the instructions, so we're not going to play soccer. And I remember at one point she got so frustrated with me, she slapped me across the face.
Oh, wow.
Whoa.
And I was so insulted and incensed that I was like, you know what? You don't want no help? You ain't gonna get no help from me. But then as I was reflecting on it, I was like, hey, I'm actually in the wrong here. Because without relationship, she just sees me as somebody who's trying to impose my will on her, something she doesn't want to do, which is probably something she gets, shut down every day at school about how she's not this and she's not that, she's not going to make it, she's not going to do whatever. But until I actually recognize, until I learn to love her and accept her where she's at and accept, hey, we can play soccer now, but at some point you got to learn to read. But we'll do this at your pace when you want to, and we'll walk this all the way out because my job here as your tutor should be to empower you, not to just dictate to you what the right thing is. And so I was really upon reflection, I was like, I think I I would have preferred her to be more Asian.
Yeah.
But that's not fair to her.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, that would mean I'm the one that's enforcing my will as opposed to allowing her to flourish in hers.
Well, we don't advocate any violence, but
Well,
that's not the proper
If you're the
response.
child that was slap dated, I would like to watch. I'm just saying.
Right, but
I have a big slappable face, Joy. That's all I'm saying.
But it is
Chicks for
certainly
days.
it is certainly good to do that kind of reflection when you're interacting with people that are not like you. And I think that's part of the problem is that we don't step back and ask ourselves that question, and we don't ask us what is the better way that we should be addressing this.
What's the lens I'm using?
Yes, what is the lens that I'm using? Exactly.
Yeah, that is a real quote that we'll have to put in the show notes, and its accuracy and in its assigning to who said it. But there is a statement about that. If I'm choosing change for myself and you help me, it's a kindness, right? But if you're putting change on me, it's a violence. And I think that can be lived individually, it can be lived at a community level.
Right.
And so I think when we think about black and brown neighborhoods in the United States, interstates were cut right through them.
Right.
And they had no choice behind that, right? Where and how schools would be funded, no choice there, but you always get the low end of that stick, right? What kind of housing is built and where you can and can't live, how you can't get funding for your home. So all these decisions have been made for these neighborhoods. And I think we can then feel that's even people who agree that that's a problem, that racist history exists, can still function in that same frame to say, well, now we need to build better streets, we need to build better housing, we need to invest more in the schools. And I would say I agree to all those things, but it's still these external actors kind of coming in versus what we're trying to say here is we've got to align our work with our neighbors. It is about the fundamental redistribution of power, not just infusion of the resources that were taken out at some time ago.
Yeah, and it's liberating for those that are invested in that have choice.
Yeah.
And then they become more invested in their own solutions. And they become more appreciative of those that may be trying to help. But you have to empower them and give them voice to be able to do that.
Well, and I think in that work, patience is power. Listening is empowering.
Yes.
Restraint is powerful. And I think unless the recipient feels empowered by that, and they recognize, like, thank you for waiting for me to learn, or thank
Yeah.
you for giving me the space to figure this out. I
Right.
think it does feel like violence. And I also reflected on that experience and, like, why was I in such a hurry, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
how fast is she going to read? Like,
That's so true.
but, like, I think
Right.
part of it is my immigrant narrative was like, this is it. Like, you ain't cute, you can't dance, you can't sing, like, you can't play basketball, like, you gotta study. That was my narrative, but that's not her narrative necessarily. And I think that's the thing. We have to have patience and grace for one another, and learn to empower people from where they are, not where I think they should be.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Yeah. So what have we? So we've, so FCS has been around since the late '70s. We've been partnering with Historic South Atlanta since 2001. So in the 20 plus years we've been in South Atlanta, so let's call ourselves to the table. Have we created more racial equity in South Atlanta over the last 20 years? And if so, what does it look like? How are we seeing equity increase in the last 20 years in this neighborhood?
Well, the easy one is home ownership.
Home ownership, I
Right.
was going to say, we've home ownership has gone from less than 10% to over 60%. We have less blight. We have built or partnered with or developed over 200 homes. A third of home ownership, and in that home ownership portfolio, you've got a third of those residents that are coming from lower income levels. We're working with the schools. We know the schools are improving with purpose-built schools. We have opened Carver Market, community grounds, so we have this third space for community engagement. Food access is available. We are creating opportunities for our youth through our neighborhood engagement. Children are riding bikes. They are talking and opening up in these sessions about feelings and hurt and pain and celebrating and just really learning trust, which is really important. So I feel like there has been work that has been done. I can see it. We have neighbors that we employ. Half of our staff is part of the neighborhood. A little bit of our board is connected to the neighborhood. And we have so many of our residents that are connected to various pillars. We've got someone working at the market that lives in the housing. Children are in youth group. And children that in youth group grow up to become youth leaders. And we have staff here that we can actually go to and say, are we doing this right? And what is your feeling about it? What is your opinion about it?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm seeing that I think is harder to measure, but we're trying to find ways to do that, is the safety, but from a lens of sense of place, not just is crime happening, but safety in the sense that I feel comfortable in this neighborhood. I feel I belong here. I know my neighbors know me. I don't worry when I sit on my porch. I don't have a lens of anxiety. One of the effects that they've seen in disinvested neighborhoods is just the almost like PTSD symptoms that brains are developing because there's so much worry about what is happening in this neighborhood. Do I belong in this neighborhood? Am I physically safe in this neighborhood? Am I socially safe in this neighborhood? And so I think the social fabric stuff that FCS has invested in so deeply in that 20 years, and again, that's where, like David, you're talking about being pilot, co-pilot. It's not, we can't take full credit on any of this, right? And so one of the roles we've played is in that civically, continuing to add strength to something that existed before we were here. And now to see that civically, so even through the pandemic where it obviously struggled, but to still be so strong and how it's connected up the chain at a city level and talking to city council representatives, that kind of internal cohesion to a neighborhood and that sense of safe belonging to a neighborhood, and the voice that it can kind of go up the chain to a city level. Seeing those social muscles strengthened to me is one of those signs of equity in South Atlanta as well.
I heard from Pamela, our director of neighborhood engagement, say that measurement of pride of neighborhood and sense of place, that number went up during the pandemic. So that how you feel about a place, even in a time of lockdown and obviously just national turmoil, political turmoil, and yet everybody's like not just safer, but like loving being a neighbor here. I thought that the fact that
rare.
we've measured that is
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
wow, I don't know if my neighborhood feels this way. You know?
And we don't think about it, and we really don't use the terminology here about addressing trauma. But what we are doing is really just that.
Yeah.
And I was listening to someone recently, and they talked about the episode of trauma. Well, the addressing of the trauma typically happens 10 years after the episode of trauma.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you can just imagine, if you can address that trauma earlier, they said the average addressing of it is like 10 years later.
Wow. Good grief.
10 years later. So you have people that are carrying so much trauma, and it's affecting their emotional and social development. It's affecting how they relate to people. And so I really look at our work as really addressing, that day-to-day sometimes trauma that you're not even aware of, that kids are going through, that adults are going through. But we are providing some solutions here to address it.
I love that you brought up the youth group and the fact that we're addressing trauma for adults, but like for the kids to be able to talk about how they feel openly amongst each other.
Right.
That is like counter to Black culture, honestly. Like I know that it's just kind of expected that in many cultures, I think, but obviously I can only speak for my experience of my own culture, but like suppressing how you feel, keep it to yourself, pull yourself together. We don't have time to cry. Just keep it pushing. But then to see, like, to get updates from our youth leaders who are telling us about how they had, like, time after their bike ride, they all gathered and talked about how they were feeling that day. And it was like, they had an exercise where they said, I'm mad because, and then they talked about why they felt the way that they felt. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It is.
That is amazing.
Right.
It's like therapy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And Michelle, who works with our youth group that's on our staff, like when she talks about the bike riding, like she recognizes, yes, that's a fun activity. It's physical, gets kids out and doing something enjoyable. It's outside its nature, but like trauma has to be worked through your body. You can't just sit quietly and mentally or emotionally process that still. Your body has to work that out, right? And so like for her, like the bike rides are doing a whole host of things, one of which is like, especially after the murder of Rayshard Brooks in our neighborhood by the police, like kids are feeling it just like anybody else would, and being able to talk through that and walk through that and feel that and let them just physically get it out, right, is just a part of that. And to say, like, this is, again, if you're going to use this lens, like the lens also, trauma can't not be a part of what you think about, whatever age group that you're working with.
And you have to connect that trauma to white supremacy. You have to understand that families that have been ripped apart, fathers that have been dehumanized, incarcerated, mothers that have been abused, we have not historically had the opportunity to open up. We've not had the courage and the strength to speak up for ourselves. We have just been in survival mode.
Wow.
And so that is not something that can easily go away, and that is passed from multiple generations. So using that lens to know that there is trauma and that there are people that need a different kind of help than others, maybe more. When we talk about equity, it is not delivering the same to the same, to everyone.
That's right.
It is recognizing that there are histories and there are stories and experiences that warrant more attention.
David's done a great job with our training consulting work and talking about, so this idea of like each neighborhood, equity doesn't mean delivering the same thing in every place in the same way, right? Is that he'll use this metaphor of neighborhoods as like a nervous system. And Like, and we've even seen just in different neighborhood to neighborhood where we're doing training consulting work is like some organizations and neighborhoods respond pretty quickly to what we're offering and doing, and some can recoil at the beginning. And for us, it's going like, okay, that's telling us that the nervous system of this neighborhood has experienced trauma somewhere.
Yeah.
And so when new stimuli shows up, they're pulling back, right? And that's not to be taken personally by us or by the organizations we're working with. It's just like, all right, something has happened here, right? And you've got to do the patient work to enter in, right? Like the thing that we're helping you learn about may take 6 months in the 3 states away, but for you, it might take you 2 years to do this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so key. I think even within minority communities, we tend to, because of this is a product of shame, right? Trauma creates shame where we prop up the successful and we recognize there are some high flyers among us, but that's the tip of the iceberg. That hides a great deal of us who are suffering in silence or keeping up the mask and like just sort of like hiding a bunch of secrets behind that. And we're constantly afraid of failure and anxious about our futures and regretful about our past. So there's a lot of hidden trauma that can often do well in the workplace, but really in our neighborhoods we're not functioning well.
Wow.
Our households are broken, and I think, and this is to that point. Like it has to happen at the neighborhood level if we're going to really create safe places for families, because some of us know that we have parents that work really well. They're hard workers. They're high achievers.
Absolutely.
But we've not known how to be a family. We've not known how to create neighborhoods. And that's one of the really painful sort of aspects of immigrant Black and brown families is we've been working so hard. We don't really know how to talk about what's going on inside. And to be acknowledged and seen and to be able to give permission to say, what are you feeling? And we're going to be here all day till you can put some words to it.
Major.
Right. Right. And there's there's that shame that that doesn't allow you to even share with your children. And I will talk about, so my father, still alive, professional educator, but in his lifetime, he's had to sit in the balcony. He's had to sit or not travel with his tennis team in college. So just imagine being a father and then having to come home and you're the man of the house. So it creates in these families blockages, valves that are shut off emotionally, and create shame. So we are still living right now with a lot of shame from discrimination and unjust policies.
That reminds me of a story of families where I know they were professors in Korea, but when they came here, they were janitors.
Yeah.
And then the only place where they felt some self-respect on this soil was they became elders at their church. And it's like, hey, I was somebody some time ago, but who am I now? And a lot of that is, again, it feeds the shame or the sense of like anger. Like it's just sublimated anger. Like, so like, hey, I want you kids to do this well. I want you to succeed. I want you to make lots of money. But then like a lot of our generation, my second generation that's grown up here, it's like we do get good jobs, but then we're like, sort of like, now what? I don't even know myself, or I'm disconnected from my community. I'm disconnected from what it means to be me. And then we're sort of like too far down the road to be like, what do I do now?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Shifting gears a little bit to think about, there's, the statements I read were about FCS's sense of responsibility for racial equity externally facing as we work into the neighborhood, whether we're doing housing work or economic development, whatever we're doing, this is the lens. What about internally? What does it mean for a team, for an organization to embrace this value or this lens of racial equity? What does it mean to be more than a diverse team? Because we're that. By any measure or metric of being diverse, FCS is crushing it, right? But what is the difference from being a diverse team versus being a team that promotes equity?
I feel like this goes back to that checklist thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like when, people, your company, your organization can have a DEI training maybe, You can look at your organization and say, okay, we've got 10 employees and 4 of them are Black, so we're doing good. Like, I feel like that's kind of how people look at diversity a lot of the time, but it doesn't talk about, it doesn't go deeper. Like, diversity is important because, I don't have the word in my brain. I can't get it, but
Is it representation?
yes,
That's
thank
word.
you.
Okay.
How did you
I don't know. It was
get it?
floating around your head. I didn't see it.
Representation is important.
Yeah.
So diversity is important, but at the same time, it is that surface level. So like, you just gotta go deeper. It's important to go deeper because that's the only way that you undo systems and change them.
Yeah.
Yeah, diversity is the presence of people that are different. That's what diversity is. But if we are a team that is working toward equity, then we are ensuring that all our processes and our programs are fair to all people. So that means that we are recognizing all the different circumstances, and that we are allocating the appropriate resources needed for people to have the outcomes that we want. So just the presence of people that are different does not give you the outcomes that we are seeking.
Yeah, I've heard some of the critiques of the DEI movement is that it's seeking to increase percentages of representation, but power isn't yet being shared.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Who's
right.
in control? Who's
Right.
making the decisions? Who influences the future?
That is so true.
And there was, we'll leave them unnamed on a public podcast, but an organization I was talking to where we were trying to push in on some of this equity framework, and they're like kind of wanting to just show us the role of everyone that's involved, and it's wildly diverse. I mean, people from all over the world. But it's like, well, if you're 3 steps from the top, it's all white.
Right.
You go 3 steps down, okay, now it starts getting, quote, diverse. And so it's like, I'm glad that you're hospitable and welcoming in your general space, but when the doors get closed and decisions get made, same people are still in charge, right? And
Yeah,
like
that's right.
that's a big
Yeah,
difference.
you have to look at where that power is concentrated. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, another diverse place is MARTA. Diversity by itself doesn't say like a movie theater can be diverse, but who's making the movies? Like who are the actors on the stage? I think that's not diverse as the people who pay to watch the films, and I think that's where you get real sense of power and who's authoring, who's invited to create the future as opposed to just be consumers of it.
And even if you've got, the diversity is maybe not at the top, but are you going to these other levels for input on decisions that are made? So are you passing power on to maybe lower staff people that still can have some input into what we're doing? Are you giving them a voice? Are you giving them a vote? We realize that there's some decisions that are executive and they just have to be made. And even in those circumstances, you need to go to people and explain why they were made and why it didn't include them. But you've got to have some mix. You've got to have people even on teams, as directors that are, not quite top. But even as you've got teams, within your teams, you have to give your staff power and a voice. Because otherwise they will not be invested in the work, they will not grow professionally, they will not, you will lose trust, you will not retain employees, your employees will not be productive, they will not be happy. So I think, again, you've got to figure out, even if that top looks quite white, how are we going to go to the levels and still empower people to have decisions, these major decisions that affect our company?
That's really good.
I mean, if we're going to create a more racially equitable society, we need leaders of every race, color, creed, religion, background, orientation. Like, we all got to be on board with this. So for the white leaders that are out there that care about racial equity, that want to be supportive and partnering with neighborhoods that are majority minority, what would we say to them? To say, here's how you can be a white leader, a good partner as a white person in a predominantly minority context.
Listen.
Right. And examine your own biases and own them.
Yeah. Don't take anything personally. Try not to. That's so much easier said than done. But like when you're listening to people and you're amplifying Black and brown voices or voices that are historically marginalized or silenced, just like pay attention to how you feel. Why do you feel that way? Like just processing, reflecting, and listening. Those are the things I feel like make great leaders.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Joy.
I was just going to say, and we talk about it, Sean, and about know yourself to lead yourself. Whatever those tendencies are, feel them, observe them, acknowledge them. But you might want to change your behavior.
Yeah.
So, maybe your tendency is to react and respond and feel, but catch yourself and change your behavior.
There was a social experiment done. I think it was in the. I'll just explain the experiment. It was they had a group of minority employees in a room, and there was a lot of free-flowing conversation, and then they had introduced a white person, and then the conversation stopped because everybody sort of deferred to whiteness. So it's really interesting I think for advice for white leadership is to recognize that your dynamic changes the room. So like you said about knowing yourself to lead yourself is you have to know that the room may respond very differently the second you enter in. And it may have nothing to do with you. It's just the fact that people on the margins, minorities, have sort of always expected and often been proven correct that white people sort of think they're in control and own the room and they act like it. So we let you. So the real flip, the reversal there is to Candace's point, is to listen, to entrust the group, entrust yourself to the group, entrust other leadership to lead. I think that is going to be a muscle that maybe you don't use, or maybe it's not exercised, or maybe you haven't seen it modeled. But I think as a person of color, I haven't seen it much, but when I see it, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and get to know people of color. Get to know them even outside of the office. And then take a look at your pipeline. Take a look at your staff, take a look at how you hire, take a look at who's on your board. And if you want to know a person to hire, ask another Black person if you're looking for a Black person. We have a network. We are associated. We've got a church. I know people. So really think about the pipeline and creating environments and cultures that are comfortable for everyone.
And if we truly want our organizations to be multi-ethnic, I think our lives have to be multi-ethnic. I mean, if you haven't had people of color at your home, if they haven't eaten at your dining table or even showered in your bathroom, I think you can expect your life to be as homogenous as your home life. But I think the challenge is, and again, I think it's challenging for all people of color too. I mean, I think, it's only been in the last, decade or so that I've had, friends of color that can help give insight and challenge me on things. And, I grew up in the South as a minority between white and Black community. So I always thought I was well versed in this, but actually you don't have to go very far to be like, I'm at square one, I'm a learner.
Yeah.
And when our church started getting close to Hispanic neighborhoods, that's where I realized, we might have the same immigrant experience, but we are not the same. And the way the Hispanic community is experiencing life in America is very different from the way my parents experienced life in America. So again, humility, listening,
and tie your success to that of the marginalized.
Yeah, to their success.
We are all connected. And I think part of that is we feel so separated.
Yeah.
So I think if you start thinking about how tied we all are, and as Christians, you should be kind of thinking about how you steward everything anyway.
Right.
You know, it's not yours. It comes through you. You're here to give. So how do you steward your resources? How do you how do you live a life that, would be in God's eyes the way that we should be?
A blessing to others.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
It seems like the leaders that I feel like do this well, whether they're white in a majority minority context, or even they're a leader of color in a context that isn't their own racial or ethnic background. Like those that are doing it well have a pretty flat power structure, right? That there's not a centralizing of the leader voice, where there's not the guy or the gal that walks in the room and the room goes quiet. They're like, regardless of kind of which racial dynamic is leading versus what is in the community, that the leaders who do this well have an ability to kind of fade to the background in as much as possible, right? And what does it mean and so FCS has one of our kind of principles, this idea that we will put the interest of the neighborhood above the interest of the organization, right? So that's an external thing, but can we internally do that? Like put the interest of the staff above whatever, like if you're the top role or the second role, how do you put the interest of those that report to you above your own, right?
Right.
So when I read the critiques of DEI initiatives, what I hear them often saying, we can put some links in the show notes, they're trying to say like, the best way to upend this is creating flatter leadership structures, right? And in conversation with friends of mine or leaders of color, like I think they would say, yeah, we've kind of bought into some of that whiteness way of leading organizations where we create this really heavy power structure. And it's like, hey, what we don't need to do is replace that same power dynamic just with different color in the room, right?
Wow.
So if there are organizations who are listening in and saying, I at a personal level value racial justice, racial equity, but I want to lead in a healthier way into that, what would be some of your kind of, here's some key ingredients, here's some steps to do that we would advise if you really want to be a leader who's serious about creating racial equity?
All racial groups have struggled under white supremacy, and that we have to interrupt those patterns, and those patterns of prejudice. We have to do some internal work and examine why we have certain thoughts about certain people, and that we have to acknowledge, affirm, and act.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have at least established some good steps.
Yeah.
Here at FCS, and with up under each of those, take a look at the different areas of your organization, and really think about those tactical things that you should be doing, top to bottom, and be flexible and understand that every day you can learn something new, and it may be from someone you never expected. So be open, but really acknowledge, affirm, and act. Those would be my steps.
Well, that was such a good answer.
I know.
Jeez.
What she said.
I'm not going to follow that with nothing better.
Well, what would you say examples of it done poorly? Maybe ask it the other way, where you know the heart of that leader is, quote, in the right place, that you know they care about racial equity, racial justice, but the way they're leading is counterproductive to what they say they want.
Well, I think one of the easiest pitfalls is you see the objective more vividly than you see the people around you. I know, or I have been in organizations where the goal is just so clear in the leader's mind that they're willing to compromise a relationship or trust or integrity to get there. But I just want to say, I think we're in a season in this nation's history where we really would like to see some integrity. Like, we want to see people valued, and we want to play the long run as opposed to these short run wins. Or I understand that leaders these days are under a great deal of pressure to make the bottom line work and to like please board members or investors or stakeholders. But really, I think the long run requires us to think about community, like a real sense of community, a real sense of vision, a real sense of compassion. And when I read stories of CEOs who lower their salary before they cut employees, or ways that they're thinking of to care for, in an age of rising healthcare costs, for organizations to think about benefits for their employees and childcare. And I just think that's the kind of humanity that we need to see exemplified by leadership of any color. But particularly now, I think the credibility and the sort of trust in institutions and that leadership can be trusted. I think we're in a season where we really long to see that.
I feel like you made a great point. I think sometimes it's important, a lot of times it's important for a leader, like what you said, if they have an idea in their head of how things should be or how things should go, I think that tunnel vision kicks in sometimes. And being able to give up the right to be right and to listen to other people's input sometimes. And to just like, if you want to take in the opinions and voices and needs of diverse voices in the room, or really any other voices in the room, just, I'm going to reiterate, be quiet. Like, just, I think sometimes white leaders, especially white male leaders, it's just very inherent that you're doing it the right way. So it's like, sometimes there's like an unintentional, which is not my current experience. I love Sean. Sometimes there's just like this unintentional like dismissiveness. Like, no, we're going to do it this way because this is what I have in my head and I think this is right.
Right.
But like being able to listen to other voices and sometimes amplify other voices. Because some subject matters, your subordinates or employees may know more about how to approach it than you. So like just listen, and be quiet, both. And
Yeah, if you don't know, you can say you don't know.
it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Like,
Right.
I respect that. It's something I've learned, like even as a parent, and having a parent. If you can say you don't know, good, thank you. So you acknowledge that you're human. Great.
Yeah.
Right.
There's something to be said about that, I guess.
Well, you guys are wonderful human beings. I consider it a treasure to get to work with you every day. So thank you for this conversation and just being who you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Place Matters is produced by Focused Community Strategies, whose mission is to partner with under-resourced neighborhoods to provide innovative and holistic development that produces flourishing communities and God's shalom. Place Matters is hosted by FCS's training and consulting team, known as the Lupton Center. If you would like to inquire about our training and consulting services, please reach out to us via our website or find us on LinkedIn and social media. This information can be found in the show notes. If you would like to watch these episodes, the videos can be found on our YouTube channel. And if you like these episodes, please share them on social media. Your support means a lot to us. This show was edited by Tim Rhodes with music by Eric North. Special thanks to David Park and Becca Malpass at FCS for their work in organizing and recording these sessions. We'd also like to say thank you to our partner, Lilly Endowment, whose Thriving Congregations grant has made this podcast possible.